The next super global on our list is called server. So underscore server on the right hand side. If we click on that one and let's see what it says. Description says that server is an array containing information such as headers, paths, and script locations. The entries in this array are created by the web server. There is no guarantee that every web server will provide any of these. Servers may omit some or provide others not listed here. That said, a large number of these variables are accounted for in GCI 1.1 specification, so you should be able to expect those. Now if we scroll down to the indices section, it again says that you may or may not find any of the following elements in server. And then we have obviously note that few, if any, of these will be available if indeed have any meaning if running PHP on the command line. Command line, basically, you may remember when we were basically setting up our virtual host, we were using either command line on Windows. We've also used terminal on the Mac and terminal on the Linux. Basically, this is the tool that you usually use to process some commands. But don't worry about this. This is not part of this course, so don't worry about that. We are going to start with PHP self, the file name of the currently executing script relative to the document root. For instance, server PHP self in a script that the address http://example.com, then we have /foo/bar.php would be /foo/bar.php. Basically what it does, it cuts off the domain name and the protocol used for this domain name, and it only returns anything basically that's listed after the domain, but excluding the query string. As you may remember, the get superglobal pulls the query string, so that would be omitted from this protocol. So if we, let's say, had question mark after PHP here and say ID = 1 or anything else, then that would be excluded. You still only get basically the foo/bar.php. So let's quickly have a look at this in the editor. And what we're going to do is basically echo _server, and let's use this index PHP, capital letters, PHP _self. And if I now put semicolon at the end, let's go back to our browser, refresh the page, and all we can see is index.php /index.php. Even though we don't strictly define that we are calling index.php, but this is the file which is basically called when the domain only is placed within the URL, and basically we creating this request. So obviously that is calling this index.php file, which is right because that's the file which we are actually working with. So /index.php, but let's try and add this query string instead as well. So if I just say page equals about, if I hit enter, as you can see, it ignores any query strings. So it's only giving us the path to the file. Query string is completely ignored. So if I just remove this query string for now, and we can go back to our editor. Let's remove this one. The next one we're going to have a look at is server as well, but this time it's going to be called server _ADDR for the address, semicolon at the end, obviously. And let's go back to our browser, but before we hit refresh, let's go to the specification actually and see what this specific one does. So server ADDR, the IP address of the server under which the current script is executing. My script is executing under my MUMP installation, so whatever obviously IP address is associated with this machine, which I'm running here, that's what we should see in the URL. And because I'm running this on a local host on my local machine, I should see the IP for the local host. So if we refresh the page, and there we go, 127.0.0.1 is equal localhost. Basically, whenever you're running a script on your local machine, that's the IP address that is actually corresponding to your local host. So that you're probably gonna see the exactly same thing, unless you are running the script on the remote server. So that was the next one, server address. Let's go for server name now, the next one. The name of the server host under which the current script is executing. If the script is running on a virtual host, this will be the value defined for that virtual host. And as you know, we have defined virtual host, this php course.dev. It's not the domain name that's registered anyway. This is the made up domain name basically, which is the virtual host. So that's what we should see. So let's go back to our editor and now remove the server address basically and replace it with server underscore name. And if we save it, go back to the browser, refresh, and there we go. Fair enough, we've got php course.dev. Let's now go back to the specification. Let's have a look at the next one, which is the server software. Server identification string given in the headers when responding to requests. Let's use this one. I'm just going to copy this actually, so I don't have to type that much. And let's go back to our editor. Let's replace name with the software. And if we go back to the browser, refresh the page, and there we go. We have Apache because I'm running MUMP, and the installation which I've got is using the Apache web server. And now just to confirm this, if we open the Firebug, if I refresh the page, actually if we go to the net section, refresh the page, we get this GET request because we only loaded the page without posting anything or anything like that. And if I just expand this, and if we have a look at the headers, response headers from the server, which we got basically from the same computer, obviously, because we're running everything on the same computer, the server entry is actually providing this Apache in the header. So obviously in the headers that have been sent back to the browser. So browser reads, okay, this specific script runs on the Apache server. So that's basically the entry, which is corresponding to the same index of our super global server. Now let's go for the next one. We've done our software. Let's see request method. This one is pretty interesting as well. Which request method was used to access the page, i.e. get, head, post, put. And then we have PHP script is terminated after sending headers. It means after producing any output without output buffering if the request method was head. So that only applies to the head method. We're not going to be really using a head in this exercise. So let's quickly have a look at actually what we are going to get and how we can actually change this. So if I just use this request method, go back to our browser, refresh the page, and there we go. We are using the get method because we only use the URL. We loaded the page without posting anything to it or anything like it. So we've got a get request. This is what we're getting when we first load the page. But what if we are going to use the form? Let's quickly, under this, let's close the PHP tag and create the HTML form. So form, and I'm going to use the method post. If I now just use input, type text, and let's just put some values straight away into it, 1, 2, 3, for instance, and then let's create another input, type submit, and that's going to be our submit button value, simply submit. That's the label which is going to be displayed on this button. So if I refresh the page now, we've got this submit with straight away the value which I put in associated with the value attribute. And if I click on submit, look at the value above. There we go. That's now post. Basically this request method server super global has figured out for us that obviously now we've requested, basically we've posted data, and now the request method is post rather than get. So that's how this specific super global might be of use. Obviously, if you let's say running some script on one page and want to check if the post has been submitted, then do something. Otherwise, if the page only loaded, then do something different. So you can obviously use conditional statement. If let's say server request method equals post, then what I want to do, I want to, let's say, add all the data that has been submitted to the database. Otherwise, I would like to display the page, only display the page with the form, let's say. So you can use this obviously specific super global for this sort of purposes. Okay, I'm going to remove all this now and just leave the server, excuse me, request method. And the next one, if we go back to our browser, let's have a look at the specification. Next time I want to have a look at is document root. The document root directory under which this current script is executing as defined in a server's configuration file. So let's quickly go back to our editor and let's use this one, document_root. If we save the file, and go to our php course.dev. Now I'm going to, rather than refresh the page because we've posted, obviously then we're going to get this pop-up if we try to refresh, simply reload the page, place your cursor within the URL and hit enter. Okay, so we've got users Sebastian desktop PHP course, which is exactly where my script, my index.php file, which we are calling by calling this domain, is placed. So this is basically giving us the location of the script. It's pretty much the same as if we were calling echo, if I just echo this basically, as if we were calling the __ dir. You may remember this constant from a bit earlier when we were discussing constants. If I now save it, you'll see that the value is exactly the same. So basically that's what this specific super global gives us. It's pretty much the equivalent of this dir super global. Okay, the next one, if we go back to the browser, to the specification, is going to be, if we scroll down, remote host. And now this one's gonna work a little bit different on my machine. I'm just going to use a copy this. Basically what it does, the host name from which the user is viewing the current page. The reverse DNS lookup is based off the remote address of the user. And you can read a bit more about this, but what I want to show you is something different than what we've been doing up to now. If I just save it and preview it in a browser, there we go. We've got a notice, we've got error. And what it says, it simply says the undefined index remote host. That means that obviously my server does not provide this specific index. And you may find this similar situation with some of these. And this is basically when you're using them as it's been explained in the documentation. Your server may have a different configuration. It may provide these, it may not. So you always have to check before you start using them, basically whether they are available. So that was the remote host. Let's go actually back to our documentation and try the last one, which is going to be request URI, which is the one which I on this one. Okay, the URI which was given in order to access this page, for instance, index.html. So I'm just going to copy the name of this variable, and if we go back to the editor, save it, go back to the page and refresh it, and there we go. This is basically the URI which I've got in a URL. After the domain name, even though you can't see it, we have a / straight away. So this is what it did. If I was to have, let's say, query string, now let's say page equals about, this will also be added. So it's different than PHP self, which we've been using before, which was basically providing the name of the file that was basically used to make a call. This time it actually takes anything that's after the domain name, and I mean anything. If it's got, as you can see, we've got a query string, and it's also you basically provided this in the output. So we've got / starting with the / after the domain name, query string if there was the, let's say, file, because we've got index.php, so we can call it directly as well if we want to, index.php, and there we go. As you can see, it's also displayed here. Obviously, if we use a different page, which we haven't got, we're gonna get error because the page doesn't exist. We know that index.php exists because we are using this file constantly throughout this course. Then obviously we can use it this way. Even if we don't use it, it's automatically called because index.php is going to be the first file that is loaded whenever we call this domain or virtual host, in other words. Now, the only thing that it won't extract from the URL is the hash symbol and anything after that. So if I put something, if I hit enter to reload the page, as you can see, it ignores it. After the hash, it ignores the hash and anything that's after. Even if I try and add to query string after this using the and symbol and put, let's say, ID equals 2, hit enter, that's also ignored. So whatever you're gonna put here, even /, let's say something else, hit enter, again, that's all ignored. Hash symbol is basically the end of the line for this specific super global. Okay, so I think that's everything about the server super global. Obviously, feel free to play with all these other values if you want to find out more about what they are capable of returning for you, and you may use them for many different purposes, obviously. But that's pretty much how you work with them, so you have a better understanding, obviously, of how server super global works. So let's move to the next video.